Hey guys, Actor here, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the firearms Battlefield 5 could have added into this game to fit its current state. Before we carry on, I want you guys to know that you won't see any Russian weapons in this. I'm saving those for a separate video. These are only weapons that would have fit the field that you see in the game currently. We will be looking at some of the history behind these weapons and how I would balance them in the game to have them fit the game's current meta. So let's get into my very first pick. The MOS 36 bolt-action rifle out of France. The MOS 36 and the MOS, in this game 44, in real life MOS 40, were pretty much conceptualized as the front line and the rear line weapon. The front would have the MOS 40, the rear line would have the MOS 36. World War II breaks out. Germany's aggression pushes France to use the 36 as their frontline rifle. That being said, the 36 was a very reliable rifle. It had good sights for a combat rifle. It fired a potent round. It was by no means a lesser rifle than any other bolt-action rifle of the war. Now, this game, I feel like, doesn't necessarily give France enough credit for firearms. You have, what, 3 guns from France that I can think of off the top of my head. One of them is experimental, that I really didn't see much combat at all, if not any. The second one was the Shoshaw, and it was outdated by the time World War I finished. And then you have the RSC, which was an interesting semi-automatic self-loading rifle. Not the best by any means. Probably, again, outdated by the M1s, the Gewehrs, that most of the firepower other nations had. Really made things like the 1917 RSC, which is in-game, kind of irrelevant. So to have a gun like the MOS 36, which is a French rifle, which saw some real French combat, would have been really nice, because it would have had a whole nother faction. It would have opened up another door that you could play with. You have rifles from the Netherlands. They used the Steyr 95. Austria-Hungary used it in the First World War. You have guns that allow you to play as different factions in your head. The MOS 36 would have been a great addition to have in that field. I think you would best suit it as kind of a good middle ground between the Lee and the Kar. I think it cannot be faster than the Lee, and it can certainly not do more damage than the Kar 98. So maybe somewhere in the middle, about Lee Enfield, a little higher than Lee Enfield damage, a little faster than Kar 98 bolt speed. I think that's pretty much where I would have that rifle sit and be about as balanced as you could get it to be. For my next pick, we're going to be taking a little trip around the Commonwealth of the British Empire. We'll be looking at the SMLE Mark III, a rifle that was in Battlefield 1, it wasn't in 5, kind of a shame, but I think most of that comes down to its similarities to the Lee Enfield No. 4, which is in-game. It is the precursor to that rifle. Saw a lot of combat. A lot of Commonwealth nations really didn't adopt the No. 4. You had Australia, which kept their SMLEs, and you had India, which kept their SMLEs, and both of those factions saw some serious fighting. I think that adding this gun in would have been nice for the same reason adding the MOS in would. It would have allowed you to, in your head, play as a different faction. You could be playing as an Australian in a Pacific island. You could be playing as an Indian conscript fighting in Al-Sudan. It just opens the door as to what you can do a little bit, and it's a shame that we didn't really get that. However, as a rifle, it's interesting. I mean, it's pretty similar to the No. 4. The sights are significantly worse. It's still fast. It still has a 10-round magazine, still a rimmed cartridge, so reliability is meh in real life, but that's real life, not the game. If you were to add it, you would have to really put some thought into how you would balance it. So maybe you could theoretically make it a little faster, because it is a lighter gun than the No. 4. So make it a little faster, make the recoil on it a little higher, and leave the damage about the same. I would personally not let somebody put a scope on it. SMLEs did not make good sniper rifles, but this game will allow you to put a scope on it. I'd like to see maybe the highest you can get is like a 3 times instead of a 6 times. That way there's still a niche for the number 4. But yeah, I mean, it's a rifle that saw an outrageous amount of service in a part of the world that doesn't get enough credit for what was going on during the Second World War. So I think it would have made a great addition to the game in its current state. Next on my list is a firearm from the United States, the 1903 Springfield. This rifle kind of baffles me as to why it's not in the game. When they added the Pacific, I feel like throwing in the Springfield would have been the perfect choice. I thought the 3 they should have added were the Garand, the Browning, and the Springfield. We got 2 of those, so it is what it is. But I don't think a lot of people understand that the United States went into World War II with this rifle. They didn't have the Garand yet, so a lot of the fighting in the Pacific, the early fighting, took place with Springfields. Battles like Guadalcanal, places like that. You're talking about standard issued bolt action rifles before the Garand came into the picture. So it's kind of unfortunate that it's forgotten about a little bit. Now, later in the war, it would be used as a sniper rifle instead of just being issued as an infantry rifle. But, I mean, you're still looking at a year of combat, maybe more, and then countless service years as a sniper rifle. I think that warrants being put in this game a little bit. It fires the same cartridge as the M1 Garand. It's a 30-06. It's a bolt-action rifle that the United States does not have in game right now. There are several reasons that they didn't put it in, obviously. It's primarily remembered as the World War I gun, which is a shame, because again, it's all combat, but when you're coming in before the Garand, when you're opening the door to the M1 Garand, you're gonna get forgotten. The M1 is arguably the best rifle of the Second World War, maybe bar none, next to the STG-44. So I think that's one of the reasons it's not in this game. Most people look at it and go, oh yeah, that's the World War I gun. But no, Marines in the Pacific used the Springfields throughout the first portion of the war until they got their Garands. That is why I think it warrants being put in this game. It would be nice because it would allow the Americans to have a bolt-action rifle instead of having to use the M3, which is an interesting firearm. It was real. They fielded them, but interesting nonetheless. Balance would be kind of weird. It's a Mauser action, so it's reliable. I'd say maybe make it close to the damage of a car and then just adjust the speed. So if you put the speed of it up, put the damage down. If you put the damage up, put the speed down. Because you don't want it to be just a carbon copy, which is, for all intents and purposes, what I'm afraid it would end up being anyway. But yeah, super interesting rifle, rich history. We needed it in game for a bolt-action rifle on the American side. They never gave it to us. Crying shame, but that is my next pick for what I think they should have put in this game. Okay, let's take a break from the bolt-action rifles for a little bit. We're going to move in to some SMGs. Now, my first pick is going to be a little weird for you guys, and I understand it. I'll explain. My first pick is the M1A1 Thompson submachine gun. Now, we have a Thompson in the game, but it is not this Thompson. This is the stereotypical GI Thompson. Now, the Thompson we have in the game is the M1928A1, which had a faster fire rate. It had a charging handle at the top, and its iron sights were pretty abysmal, if you ask me. I think adding this more iconic, I say more iconic, but in the United States, a more iconic version of this gun would have been nice. You could tone its fire rate down. You could kind of pull the damage up a little bit, make it faster than a MP40, but not as fast as a Suomi. So turn the speed down, turn the damage up. This was a very simplistic version of this gun. It was not by any means a complicated or more complicated version. It was their attempt at making it easier to manufacture and use. And for all intents and purposes, they did. Again, this is kind of the same thing with the SMLE. I don't think they would have added it because it's so similar. But again, different fire rate, pretty much completely different iron sights. You're still looking at a pretty substantial change between those two firearms. So I think the Thompson would have made the second best pick in terms of an SMG you could add, I'm going to have two more on this list that we'll get to in a second, which I think would have been maybe just a little cooler. One of them could have been. But yes, the Thompson, the M1A1 Thompson submachine gun is my pick as a gun they could have added in this game when they added the Pacific into it. And it would have been a great feature, but alas, it did not happen. Next up on the list, we go back to France for the MAS 38 submachine gun. Now this thing that looks like a monstrosity was actually a French submachine gun that was used by both the French and the Germans. The Germans, when they seized the MAS factory, ended up using these as a secondary firearm to their standard issue stuff. So you'd have military police having them, a couple of lesser combative people having them. However, that saw heavy use by the French. There were only about 2,000 of them made before the war. After the war, they would still be used as police machine guns and whatnot. Now, if I'm not mistaken, one of these things killed Benito Mussolini, or at least shot him. I believe an Italian partisan had one, but I might be completely mistaken there. But it's a submachine gun from France, and we don't have many French weapons in this game. It's a submachine gun that saw both use from French and German forces. I think it would have fit this game pretty well. Instead of having things like the Type 2A or the well gun, having a gun that was actually used would have been really, really nice. So that is why it makes my list on this video. Alright, for my next pick, we go down under, and this time for the Owen submachine gun. This thing looks awful, but looks can be deceiving. It is arguably one of the best submachine guns of the Second World War. Really good fire rate, handles really well, the front foregrip is nice, the top-fed magazine is good for feeding. Nothing really particularly wrong with this gun other than the way it looks. The history behind it is really cool. It was a civilian who just, I think it was a kid, 16, 17 at the time maybe, working in his tool shed, just kind of built a prototype. And the government was like, you know what, this might be something. So it became a civilian project that they started to produce. However, in the meantime, while that was being produced, Australia was starting to work on the Austin, A-U-S-T-E-N, an Australian Sten, which is the complete opposite of the Owen gun. It is an abysmal submachine gun, according to most who I've heard talk about it. So the Owen gun was pretty obviously the pick. I mean, it's interesting. It has a weird sight system as to you have to like roll your head over it. Most front facing guns with a top facing magazine have the sights skewed to the left, so a right-handed shooter can simply get a cheek weld and put his eyes aligned to the sights. For the Austin, you kind of have to wrap your head around, which would have been interesting to animate in the game. But I'd say make this gun a Sten with a higher fire rate. I think would have been a really interesting choice. It would be unique. It would look completely different. It comes from a part of the world that, again, doesn't get a ton of credit for what it did during the Second World War. Opens up that whole faction idea. Replace this with replace the Type 2A with this, or the well gun with this, or one of those experimental firearms that really didn't have much of an impact. Give us a firearm like these that were historical and interesting and had some sort of merit to them. Anyway, I think that should about wrap up this list. I'll tell you guys my number one pick as to of this list, what I think they should have added, or what their biggest missed opportunity was, and that's the 1903 Springfield. The United States needs a bolt-action rifle in this game. They kind of missed the mark with it. It's a shame, but we will survive and continue on. Quick announcement, I will be doing my first Battlefield live stream Thursday morning at around 7 o'clock, 7:30, somewhere in that range. I hope you guys pop in and say hi. I'll work on a more distinctive schedule on a later date, but for now, that will be the time roundabout for my first Battlefield 5 live stream. Feel free to jump in with me and have some fun. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching, and all of you have a wonderful day.